I am so excited about today's episode. In honor of the life-changing courses training that's starting in just a few weeks, and the very special early bird savings on the training that are ending in just a few days, I decided to ask you, my dear podcast listeners, for your biggest questions when it comes to facilitating groups so that you can really support your participants to achieve their goals and love being a part of your group. And the questions that you all sent in are so good. They cover topics like what to do when there's silence in the group instead of people sharing and raising their hands to share. Questions like what to do when you have over talkers in the group who are speaking about things that aren't relevant to the discussion. Questions like what's important to know when anxiety comes up in the group so that you don't get stuck there, and so much more. These are the exact types of in-depth facilitation questions and tricky kinds of group issues that I train you on step by step by step in life-changing courses so that you know how to handle any group situation that comes up, and so that you know how to set up your groups so that your participants feel like they're part of a warm community of like-minded people and they want that community to become a home base for them. Facilitation skills are so vital to leading groups that become environments for your participants to truly transform and grow. They're also vital to leading groups that your participants want to keep on showing up for and renewing into. And of course, facilitation skills aren't the only skills that you need to create and lead group programs that wow your participants and have them raving about you and your work. You also want to create a curriculum and content exercises to go along with your curriculum that activate deep breakthroughs, the kind of breakthroughs that your people will remember forever. And you also want a curriculum that deeply supports your participants step by step to learn, grow, and take effective action towards whatever goals they're working on. And facilitation skills and curriculum skills aren't completely separate. They're not in two separate silos. There is definitely a little bit of crossover between facilitation and curriculum. And so on today's episode, as I answer your questions about facilitation, I do also speak about curriculum just a little bit here and there. I give you some curriculum tips when it makes sense. And in the life-changing courses training, we don't only focus on group facilitation skills. I also teach you step by step how to craft a curriculum that is totally unique, that is totally based on your expertise and your thought leadership. Even if you don't yet know what your thought leadership is, I also teach you in life-changing courses how to create all different types of exercises that will help your participants go deeper with your thought leadership. Exercises that involve journaling, visualizations, somatics, rituals, and beyond. Okay, so with all of that, let's jump into your facilitation questions. And the first one is from Matilda. And Matilda writes in, my signature program is called ADHD Business Academy, and it's a holistic 8-month program for solopreneurs with recent ADHD and ADD diagnoses. The program has videos, one-on-one sessions, and group calls for 4 months. And then the next 4 months, it only has group calls and a Facebook group for implementation. Matilda goes on to say, my people are very open, willing to be vulnerable, and very supportive of each other. They're real connectors. And they keep on asking me to make additional calls in the program so that they can know each other better. The group process is so important in my group because as late diagnosed adults of ADHD, they struggle with low self-acceptance, and being among other neurodivergent people is really part of the healing. Where they have been masking in the outside world ever since they remember, inside of the group, they want connection and more of this feeling that they can finally be themselves. And then finally, Matilda says, I totally understand their need to connect, but it's additional time for me to put into the group, and I don't want to put that additional time in. What would you recommend? This is such a great question. And first of all, Matilda, I am so impressed with the work that you're doing. It's so important. And your question really gets to one of the key pieces of how group programs are so powerful. One of the reasons why group programs are so powerful is because of the group. It's not just what the people in the group get from the facilitator, but when you are skillfully leading a group, it becomes a community. And the people in the group look forward to connecting with the community. And that's exactly what's happening here. And that's exactly why your people want you to hold additional calls. Now, here's the good news, because I hear you, you don't want to put in more time. There are actually lots of ways that you can support your clients to have this community experience that they really want, this experience that helps normalize their experience with ADHD, this connection that they really want with each other. There are lots of ways you can support this without putting in more of your time. And I'll share a couple of ways that you can do this. Number one, within the training calls that you're leading, make sure to make enough time for the group to share and also for some breakout room opportunities in those calls. So you're already spending that time, taking that time on the group calls. And the idea is integrate more community time, time where different members of the group can hear each other, can connect with each other, can reflect to each other. Integrate that into the training calls themselves. One of the biggest mistakes that group leaders often make is they put too much into their curriculum and they don't create enough time on their live calls for sharing, coaching, breakout rooms. So that's one thing you can do, but there are other things you can do as well that don't have to take up more of your time. Another idea to consider to help the people in the group connect is to have accountability partners in the group. You would pair up people in the group and you would create a set of instructions on what the accountability calls would look like. And then outside of class time, your people can meet with each other and connect with each other and support each other to move forward. Another idea along these lines that doesn't take your time is to create the opportunity within the community for self-led discussion groups. groups. So the people in your program, they would get together on their own without you, and they would lead discussion on the topics that you were covering in the program. Now, one thing, if you're going to do self-led discussion groups, that I really highly recommend is to provide a template that the groups can use each time so that they know how to run these discussion groups. And that template can have agreements within the group and then questions that they ask each other or answer each time. Now, the last piece that I want to point out around this question is you may want to consider looking at your curriculum for your program and working into the curriculum inner work to support your participants to go deeper, to feel more comfortable and courageous, to be themselves in their businesses. One of the reasons you're saying that your participants want to meet is because when they're meeting with each other, this is one of the only places that they can feel they can be themselves. And so with this piece, what I'm recommending is use some of your program time to support them to learn how to be themselves more and more in their businesses. This is such a huge growth edge for your clients. And I would absolutely address this head on inside of your business. Help your participants see how they can show up even more in their work, in their business, with their own clients. Help your participants to honor and celebrate who they are inside of their businesses. I happen to have a lot of clients in my trainings who have been diagnosed with ADHD late in life as well. It seems to be pretty common among women. And I'll share that a really big and deep and profound piece of work that I often do with my clients who have been diagnosed later in life is to support them to find their own superpowers inside of their ADHD. So instead of just focusing on the liabilities, support them to find what their superpowers are. When you do this, it gives your clients so much more permission to be themselves. All right, so as a review again, if you've got a community who is asking for more time to connect with community, you don't have to, as the group leader, give more of your time. You can integrate more sharing and breakouts in the call time that you already have scheduled. You can create an accountability partner component of your program. You can create self-led discussion groups inside of your program. And then you can also, as a bonus, add in more inner work to support clients to feel more themselves in all areas. All right, let's keep on going. Here's another question that we received, and it's from Angela. And Angela asks, she says, I would like to learn how to hold space in group settings, especially when I ask participants to share and there is seemingly endless silence. I understand that people need time to process and share, particularly when the topics are deep, but how can I facilitate the silence? What should I say or not say? Ah, another great question, one that is so important for group leaders, because the truth is that sometimes silence is going to occur when you ask for shares and in the group. Now, this is important, this first thing I'm going to say about this. Sometimes, but not always, silence in the group means that breakthroughs and learnings are happening. And big ahas and big breakthroughs and big ideas do need a few moments to land, right? So a lot of times silence can be a really good thing. It means that new ideas are emerging, big things are happening. But that being said, other times silence in your group might mean that you've kind of lost the group's interest, or that the group is confused, or that you haven't created a tight enough container for vulnerability inside of the community. So, as the group facilitator, when there is silence, you want to first be able to determine what the silence is about. And even better, have your container and community setting skills in place so that when silence happens, you're fairly certain that it's the good kind of silence. This is why in life-changing courses, we spend a whole 2-hour training session on getting to all of the details of how to set the group container. Most group leaders have never learned the right way to do this and the right way to create community. And when you don't know, it can kind of bite you and your group in the butt with things like silence or resistance or lack of respect or love inside of the group, right? So that's the first piece. If you're getting a lot of silence, you really want to determine, is it the positive kind of silence that means breakthroughs are happening, or is it because the container and the community is leaky? And you want to tighten up those community setting skills and those container setting skills. Now, if you recognize that the silence that's happening when you ask for shares is because of big breakthroughs and processing happening, here's some things to do. Number one, remember for yourself as the leader that this is wonderful, right? It means that good things are happening, learning is happening, shifting is happening. I always say energy follows energy. And so your energetics as the leader is bar none. If you approach silence as nothing is wrong here, then it's going to be much more comfortable for everyone in the group, and they're going to know that it is normal and natural for silence to happen during big learning. Now, from there, even when there is silence, you do eventually want to get to the shares, right? To your people, your participants, your community speaking and sharing and being vulnerable. As I said earlier, shares are so important inside of group programs. It helps go deeper in fostering community. It helps normalize shared experiences. It helps create inspiration and motivation. It helps give others in the group ideas, etc., etc. So again, even when it is that good kind of silence, you do want to know what to do and say to eventually get to the shares. And I'll share with you a couple of things that you can do in these situations. Number one, speak about the silence and normalize it. So that might sound something like this. I know we just covered something really big. And when big awarenesses or ideas come through, it can take a moment to let it sink in and be ready to share. So I'm going to give you all another 30 seconds or so. And then I'd love to hear some shares so that all of us can process and learn even more deeply. So, what did I do just there in what I modeled? I spoke to the silence. I made it normal. I explained why there was silence. And then I gave it instruction, right? With inspiration. I said, I'll wait another 30 seconds, and then that will be a good time to share so that we can process and learn, right? Here's another thing that you can do that can sometimes help bring on the shares is to remind your group that the share doesn't have to be perfect or fully formed. Sometimes, especially when big ideas are coming through, people go into the myth of perfection. They feel like they have to say something really articulate or really smart, or it has to be fully formed. And then because of that, they hold back and they never share, right? So just giving that loving reminder that it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be fully formed, and that you can help them get there once they do share, that can be really helpful and get some hands being raised in the group. Another thing that you can do is let your group know that the share can also be a question or a share about how they're stuck. Sometimes you'll get silence in a group when you ask for shares because there's some confusion or because your participants have gotten stuck on something. And oftentimes people can feel like, oh, I don't want to raise my hand and ask a question or say how I'm stuck, either because they don't want to look like the only one that's stuck, which of course they're probably not, or they feel like it's causing trouble to do that, right? So you want to normalize the experience. There can be questions, you might be stuck, I can help you through it, and it will help everyone else in the group as a model. So raise your hand. Here's another thing that can help activate shares when there's silence. Ask a specific question versus a general one. So oftentimes when group facilitators want to elicit shares and discussion in the group, they'll just open up for shares. They'll say who would like to share. And I do that often myself. It's a great thing to do. It's a great way to elicit people raising their hands. But that being said, sometimes that's too general to just say who would like to share. So instead, ask a specific question about the content that was just covered. That might get people talking more. And for anyone that has kids, you know this to be true, right? When I pick up my kids from school. Well, now my younger one, my older one, I don't pick up anymore. She's too old and too cool for me to pick her up for school. But when I pick up my 10-year-old, she gets in the car. If I just say, "How was your day?" I don't really get much of an answer, right? Good, maybe something like that. It was fine. But if I ask a specific question, what did you do in English class? Or who did you sit with at lunch? Then we get the conversation going. Okay, the last piece for now, and there's so many different tips and tricks and techniques, but just one more for now on this question around silence that I want to share is that if you're getting silence a lot in the group, in addition to look at have I set a strong enough container, you may also want to go back and look at your curriculum and add in exercises so that your group and your participants can more deeply process your content points. When you have an exercise where people can more deeply process your thought leadership and the curriculum points that you're presenting, it will create much more discussion. This is one of the many huge things that we learn in life-changing courses, which is how to create exercises, whether they're cognitive exercises or somatic-based exercises or heart-based exercises or spirit-based exercises for any piece of content that you teach. All right. So again, to review the answers to Angela's question about facilitating silence, we spoke about knowing the difference between the good kind of silence in groups and the not so good silence in groups, and tightening up on your container setting skills and community setting skills if it's that second kind. We spoke about your own energetics as a facilitator when silence comes up. We spoke about normalizing the silence and then giving instructions. We spoke about reminding the group that the share doesn't have to be perfect or fully formed. We also spoke about reminding the group that they can ask a question or share about how they're stuck. And then we also spoke about the difference between general shares and asking specific questions to elicit shares. All right, let's keep on going. We got so many great listener questions. I'm going to answer a couple more. And this next one is from Hazel. And Hazel writes, how do you manage your own energy in a group setting to keep track of everyone and what's happening energetically within the group? Such a great question. How do we manage our own energy so that we can keep track of everyone else and what's happening for them? There are a couple of parts to this answer, Hazel. And the first one is a really one of the biggest pieces and keys here. The best way to manage your own energy when you're leading groups, as well as to track everyone else, is to do your own inner work. We as coaches, facilitators, group leaders, we absolutely need to be working on our own fears, our own shadows, our own triggers, our own survival mechanisms. This is bar none to being able to manage our energy in the group. So I'll give you just a couple of examples on how this can show up in groups. If you are leading a group and you haven't been working on your own inner belief that you're not good enough, guess what? It's going to show up in your groups, right? And then if you've got participants in the group that are maybe having trouble or having moments of resistance, you're not going to be able to navigate what's happening in the group if inside of yourself you are just feeling, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, right? And you're definitely not going to be able to show up as your best self. I'll name one other example of dozens. Another thing that many people who come to me and who come to life-changing courses, we work on this deeply, is the belief of I need to take over responsibility or save the group. I need to take over responsibility in the group or save the group. If you are coming in to leading a group with that belief, you are just not going to be able to navigate things well when it's time for members of the group to take responsibility for themselves or to learn something more deeply. Because inside of your head and inside of your psyche, inside of yourself, you're going to be going, I need to take over responsibility here. I need to fix this. And our job as leaders isn't to fix or save anyone. It is to hold powerful, inquisitive, loving space. So truly, and I know this sounds dramatic, but I stand by it. The inner work is the most important thing when it comes to group energy, because you will never know the best things to say. You will never be able to see things that are happening in the group clearly. You will never be able to lead your group out of whatever is coming up for them if your energetics are off. Another really important key to managing your own energy in a group is taking care of yourself, your body, and your nervous system. Along with inner work, this is top of the priority list. Your body and your nervous system, as the group leader, that's your container. And that's what helps you hold the container of the group. So if you come into leading a group and your nerves are frayed, you're dysregulated, you're really tired, you're really hungry, you haven't gotten to the bathroom, right? Whatever it is, you are not going to be fully connected into your brilliance, your intuition, and all of your resources and toolboxes to be able to lead with potency and depth. So inner work and taking care of yourself, most important pieces when it comes to managing your own energy in a group and also tracking everyone else's energy. And then from there, of course, in order to track the energetics of the group and to navigate them, you need your facilitation skills to be top notch. And it would take hours and hours and hours to go through each of the different facilitation skills you might need to navigate the energetics within a group. So we don't have time for that here, but I'm gonna cherry pick a couple of tips from that we learn in life-changing courses that can apply to any group situation. Number one, when energetics are getting wonky in the group, when things are, getting a little off in the group, when there are people that are upset or confused or whatever it is, or tired, right? Whatever it is, one thing you want to think about is naming it. I always say, speak to what is in the group. If it's getting towards the end of a long day and you notice that people are tired, name it, speak to it, say, hey, I want a name. I know it's been a long day and we're starting to maybe get a little tired because I've worked you really hard and I just want to normalize that. It's okay to feel tired. And, we've got just a little bit more, right? So you want to always speak to what is. Another little tip, well, I say little tip, but it's actually a big tip, that will help you navigate no matter what comes up in the group, whether it's resistance, confusion, grief, anger, whatever it is. Respond with love, both for the group and also love for yourself. So, a big mistake that a lot of group facilitators make is that when stuff comes up inside of the group, their first response is fear, or getting judgmental either of the person that the stuff is coming up for, or for getting judgmental of the whole group, or the facilitator even getting judgmental of themselves, right? And then compassion is out the window, and we're kind of in our own stuff. So whenever stuff comes up in a group, one of the very first things that I do is I connect with my heart and I open up my heart and I feel big love for the person, for the group, and for myself. That shifts my energetics. It takes away my fear so that I can lean in to whatever is going on in the group, and it helps connect me to all of my resources. And then the last little tip I'll give for now, again, I say little, but it's actually not at all. And this is important, is always be willing to temporarily veer from your curriculum if the group needs something else in that moment. So I am big on curriculum. This is why in life-changing courses, I teach you step by step by step how to create an incredible curriculum that's based on your unique ideas and your thought leadership. And that's why in life-changing courses, I devote so much of my time and energy to reading your curriculum and your exercises that you create step by step and giving you feedback. So I am a curriculum nerd. I'm not knocking curriculum, but what I'm saying here is the best group leaders know when it is a moment to turn away temporarily from the curriculum, to switch gears, and to meet the group with whatever the group needs then to create an exercise on the spot, or to create a discussion on the spot, or to tell a story that's going to be inspiring or shift the mood on the spot, or jump to another place in the curriculum. even, right? You learn how to be someone who's flexible and can switch gears in that way in life-changing courses. Okay, so to review, um, the answers that I shared for Hazel on managing your own energy and managing and tracking the energy in the group. Number one, your own inner work on your fears, shadows, triggers, and survival mechanisms is bar none. Number two, taking care of yourself, your body, your nervous system, also bar none. And then number three, you want your facilitation skills to be in top notch. We are not, most of us who lead groups haven't been trained in facilitation skills, and we really need to be trained in facilitation skills. They need to be modeled and learned. Okay, I've got two more listener questions. These are all just so good. Um, the next one is from Sophie. And Sophie writes in as follows. She says, I'd love to hear how you manage it when the same person keeps sharing in the group discussion, and much of what they share either isn't relevant to others or goes on for a long time, and you can see the other people in the group starting to zone out. And Sophie continues to say, I really want to honor everyone's voices, but I also want to honor the energy of the group. Another fantastic question. And Sophie, I'm going to give you a couple of pointers on this. So you ask about when the same person keeps sharing in the group, and much of what they share isn't relevant. So number one, you don't have to call on everyone who raises their hand. And I know that this is obvious in so many ways, but I think that for so many of us that are kind and loving and want everyone to feel welcome in the group all the time, there might sometimes be some fear on our part or reluctance on our part to not call on everybody who raises their hand. And this can sometimes do the group a disservice, right? So if you have a person who, raises their hand every single time, and sometimes it's not like the most relevant share in the world, don't call on them each time. Now, then the question is, but what if nobody else is raising their hand and it's just that person that keeps on sharing? Well, if that's the case, encourage others to raise their hand. So I often in a group, if there are people that have already spoken once or twice in the group, and then, they raise their hand again the next time there's opportunity for share, I will often say, I'm so happy, X name, whoever it is, that you raised your hand. And before I call on you, since you've already shared, I want to make space for other people whose voices we haven't heard or haven't heard as much yet. And I want everyone in the group to know, I want to hear what's moving through you. I want to hear your questions or what you have to say. So don't be shy, right? Raise your hands. Sometimes the group just needs encouragement. Okay, a couple other tips on this for shares that maybe aren't relevant or go on for a long time. One thing you can do is before you open up for shares, you can remind everyone to make their shares relevant, right? So you can say, I'd love to hear some thoughts on this. And I want to remind everyone as you share, please keep it to this topic that we just looked at, right? Or as you share, is this relevant to what we've been looking at today? So sometimes just like that overarching general reminder can really help direct people that otherwise may not be sharing things that are so relevant. Another thing you can do is as someone is sharing and it's just either going on for a long time or it's just off topic completely, you can interrupt. You can interrupt. And again, for those of us that are loving and kind and generous, sometimes we feel like, oh, it's rude if I interrupt this person, or they're going to be insulted, or they're going to be upset. That's not a good facilitation tactic. It's not good for the group. And quite honestly, it's not good for the overtalker because they're wasting their time as well, right? So I want to encourage you to be willing to interrupt. And of course, interrupt with respect and with love. And when you interrupt, you can say something like, hold on a second, you've been sharing so much, and I want to pause here and tell you what I've been hearing so far, right? And then you briefly, very briefly summarize just the important parts that you've been hearing. And then from there, you can either ask a very specific, focused question or ask them in a focused way to tell you what's most important about the share, right? So you summarize and then you can say something like, in one sentence now, Jackie, tell me what is most important about all of this, right? And then that's it. That's the end of the share. Maybe you respond and then you move on. So you want to interrupt, briefly summarize, and then ask a specific focused question or ask the oversharer in one sentence what's most important. And then there's one other piece on this that feels important to share right now. And what I want to say is that it can be a tricky balance because there are going to be some people in any given group that do need a little more space to get their ideas out, to articulate themselves, to be messy in the share first, to get to the gold. There are sometimes going to be people in the group who need to kind of share a little bit of the different threads so that you, the coach, the leader, can help them understand what's most important. And sometimes I will let someone talk a little bit longer because I can see that it is actually important to their process. And oftentimes, there is still gold for others in the group. So I really try to approach this not with this idea that like I just have to shut it down as soon as someone is talking a little bit too much or it's not totally relevant, but instead like where is the balance? And I approach it with love, but I also set the boundaries that I mentioned a few minutes ago. The idea is that as a leader, I want to create a culture inside of the container where differences in processing style are respected within reason, of course, right? But that's the other balance piece here that feels important to say. And you know, it's amazing what can sometimes happen when you set a culture of patience and respect and love for some longer shares inside of a container. Again, within reason. Okay, this brings us to our last audience question for today, and this is from Cecil. And Cecil's question is about anxiety in the group. Cecil says when people bring in unmanaged anxiety, how can I not let the anxious energy spread through to the group? And how can I show up for the group when one person or more is demanding attention because of their anxiety? Another great question, and one that can come up in powerful groups. So, Cecil, I hope that you have been listening to this entire episode because the answers that I just gave to Hazel and Sophie, a lot of that corresponds to your question about when anxiety comes up in the group. So, for example, as I was sharing with Hazel, so much of that starts with you as the practitioner, your energetics. And specifically, if it's about anxiety in the group, how do you respond versus react when anxiety comes up in the group? If you go into your fear places when people in the group have anxiety, if you go to the place of, oh no, I've done something wrong, I'm not a good enough practitioner. This person is going to take up too much time and space. It's going to ruin things. I'm not going to know how to handle this, right? Like any of those things, if you go to that, then you've lost your ability to hold space for what's happening, right? So important to work on your own fears, your own shadows, your own triggers, your own survival mechanisms for any group situation and for anxiety group situations so that you don't go into your own anxiety. You're going to make your best choices from your regulated place, from your grounded place. If you remember, another thing I shared on Hazel's question is respond with love and also speak to what is, name it and speak to what is. So those are pieces that you're gonna want to remember when anxiety comes up in the group as well. Now, from there, we'll go to a few other pieces. The next is when anxiety comes into a group, be willing to lean into it. What I mean by this is oftentimes a mistake that practitioners make is when anxiety comes up, they try to just get their client not to be not anxious, right? Like, what can I do or say real quick for this person to just not be anxious? But the result of that is usually that more anxiety is created because there's a pushback. And because also then the person in the group can sense that the group leader is scared. And when the group is sensing that the group leader is scared, it's going to create even more anxiety. right? So again, back to your energetics, know that it's normal, be comfortable if anxiety shows up, and lean into it. Work to befriend it instead of thinking, I just have to destroy it, right? I have to squash it. We have to eradicate this from the group. Just that in and of itself is going to deflate some of the anxiety. And then I'll add in one more tip for now. If you know that there are certain topics in your curriculum that tend to activate fear or anxiety for the group, address it inside of your curriculum. Add a section or sections to your curriculum where you do fear work around that certain topic that tends to activate anxiety. Address it head on, even before the anxiety arises, and so that you normalize it too, right? When you normalize, it's less likely to come up. When you do the inner work around the different triggers and the fears, it's less likely to come up. So I can't promise you that if you really craft your curriculum well and address resistance, that anxiety won't still come up. It will. And some anxiety coming up in a group, by the way, isn't a bad thing. It means that growth is in the air. It means that challenge is in the air. It means that transformation is in the air. It means that change is being considered, right? So again, we don't want to avoid it. We don't want to squash it. We don't want to make it a bad thing. And it can still come up in a well-crafted curriculum, but it is less likely to come up and come on uber strong if you also work it into the curriculum. Okay. Wow, we got through a lot in this episode. I really want to thank Matilda and Angela and Hazel and Sophie and Cecil for your brilliant questions that are just so applicable to any group work and to facilitation skills that we all need in order to really lead exceptional group experiences. What we looked at today, even though we looked at a lot, it was honestly just scratching the surface on the facilitation skills that every group leader needs. And if you are really committed to holding groups that go deep, that are vulnerable, that are safe, where community is really bonded and where real transformation happens, I really invite you to go deeper in your mastery of facilitation skills. And if you sense that learning with me is the way to do that, please, please check out the life-changing courses training. You get all of the curriculum and exercise development skills in there, plus my personalized feedback. You get dozens and dozens of facilitation skills, and you get to do some of that deep inner work as well that I have been mentioning throughout this episode, because it is absolutely, it cannot be separated from stellar facilitation skills. So I'll drop the link for life-changing courses in the show notes. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please go and give it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening. Please, if you have the time, take a few minutes, write us a really good review, and please pass this episode on to any friends you know who are leading courses that would just really, really get value from it. Until next time, I'll see you soon.